Hey, welcome to Biblical Insights. My name is Pastor Pat, and we are continuing in our study of the Old Testament, the covenants that God gave the Jewish people. As you know, I study the Jewishness of our faith, and I believe, again, that if we don't study the Jewishness of our faith and put an emphasis on understanding it, I think we're giving the gospel some injustice and we're not totally understanding the truthfulness. You can definitely see some of the anti-Semitic replacement theology throughout the Bible. Mainly, it's not throughout the Bible; it's how the Bible is interpreted. And some of our church, some of the individuals throughout history, they've removed the Jewishness of it, and a lot of them have put them in the place of Israel as being the chosen people. Again, I will say it, and I've probably said it a million times, and I will keep saying it a million times. The elect in the Bible are God's chosen people. We agree with that, but where we disagree, it is not the followers of John Calvin or Martin Luther. It is the Jewish people. It is the Jewish nation that God chose to for a reason. I explained this last week, that he didn't go out and choose the Jewish nation. He created it. He created the Jewish nation from Abraham. It wasn't that there was already the Jewish nation out there, the Hebrews, and he just kind of went with his 10 commandments and his law and just kind of like looked at all the different nations and decided to choose one. That's not the case. What he did, he actually created the Jewish nation from Abraham. And we looked at the Abrahamic Covenant last week, where through Abraham, we can look at it in Exodus 12, and you can look at 12, 14, or 43 through like 13:2, and it kind of gives you it gives you exact what God was talking about when God met with Abraham and Sarah. And it is right there telling you right in your face. You can look at Genesis. Another one is Genesis 17, verses 1 through 21, where God comes up, and that's where God Adonia spoke to Abram and Sarai and told him that he was going to make a nation from them. So through those two people, prior to that, he's like, you're going to get out of your nation. You're going to leave. Basically, oh, by the way, you're going to leave. I'm going to make you a mighty nation that's going to come from you. Your descendants are going to be like the sands on the seashore. You're not going to be able to count them as the stars in the sky. But up to this point, they had no kids. So that was impossible to man. But what is impossible to man is absolutely possible with God. Anything is possible with God. So that was 2 weeks ago. Actually, I rephrased. 2 weeks ago, we talked about. Last week, I took the weekend off because it was my wife and I's anniversary. So 27 years she has put up with me. So a big shout out to my wife. But with that being said, we're going to get right back into the covenants of God, that covenant that he gave to the Jewish people. He created the Jewish nation when he did the Abrahamic Covenant with Abraham. That was an unconditional covenant, meaning what? That there was nothing that Abraham had to do or not do for the covenant to be fulfilled. It was God's covenant. He created the covenant. He fulfilled it. He did everything. Abraham didn't have to do anything. It's not that he did something or didn't do. It was unconditional. God was going to fulfill his covenant. Whereas other covenants, like the Davidic covenant, were same thing, unconditional, that God's going to put from the seed of David, the Messiah, a future king, will sit on the throne of David, and it'll come through his line. The line of Judah come through David's lineage. Again, nothing that David had to do. It was all God. It was all on God. But where we're looking at today is the Mosaic covenant, where there's blessings and cursings. It is a conditional covenant that you obey God's commands and obey his covenants, and God will bless you and bless the land. But if you don't, then there's a curse that comes along with it. Sorry, I got something in my eye. So that is what we call a conditional covenant. Same thing with salvation. It is conditional, whereas it's not that we have to do it. Well, all we have to do is it's a free gift that we have to accept. It is given it. We didn't have to do anything to acquire or produce the salvation. Christ did all that on the cross. Him being our Passover lamb, that he had taken upon the sins of the world on him, that all we have to do is he did all the work. All we have to do is accept the gift that is given to us. And that is it. But we see in the country right now that just watching this video, I'm kind of off on a little tangent right now. We watched this video where we're talking about the Satanist going on. It's not that Satan wants us to follow him. He wants all these followers to follow him. He wants us to join him in rebelling against God and the creation. God created all this. He even created Satan, and he's rebelling against them, just like we rebel against God if we don't accept Christ. We are rebelling against him who's done everything for us. So we look at the Abrahamic Covenant, there's nothing that he had to do. It is all based on what God did. So we'll briefly look at that, and then we're going to kind of just finish off and jump into the Mosaic Covenant. Hopefully we'll get through it today. So, but if not, you know what? There's going to be another weekend, and we'll do it next weekend. So we look at Genesis. Let me jump in there real fast. So we're going to look at Genesis 17, and we're going to look at verse 1. We'll go through verse 1 and probably 1 through 21. And it says, when Abraham was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abram and said to him, I am Almighty God. Walk before me and be blameless. Okay, he's telling him right there. He's basically telling him what to do. Walk before me and be blameless. And I will make my covenant. See, it's his covenant that God is making. Covenant between me, talking about Adonia, and you, Abraham, and I will multiply you exceedingly. So imagine God speaking to Abraham right now when God is speaking to him. Can you imagine? I mean, he's looking at him going, wait a second, I don't have kids. And we're like you said, we're 99 years old. We're old people. I mean, yeah, Methuselah lived to 900 and something odd years old. But we're talking Abraham. He's 99 years old. And there's Sarah, she's right up along with them. So I will make a covenant between you, and I will multiply you exceedingly. Can you imagine that? That is a promise of God. That is trusting in God for something that with man is impossible. So he says, then Abraham fell on his face, and God talked with him, saying, as for me, behold, my covenant is with you, and you shall be a father of many nations. Not just the Jewish nation, but many, many nations. And again, we've talked about this before, that when God speaks of nations, okay, the Jewish nation has not been created yet. Okay, the tribes has not been created. So he's talking about father of many nations. So from Ishmael and Isaac, many nations are going to be created between those two. Okay, no longer shall your name be called Abram, but your name will be Abraham, for I have made you a father of many nations. See, there's that promise right there. For I have made you, because you got to look at it. When you look at something, when you look at how we're on a timeline. Like when you're doing video editing, you have a timeline down below and you're looking at it and you're adding things, you're dragging and dropping things into this timeline, kind of like a film strip. We are this little blip in this film strip, whereas God's looking at the beginning and the end. He sees Revelation 1, or not, Genesis 1 and Revelation, the last verse in Revelation. So he's looking at that all at the same time. Okay. And that's hard for our kind of like our pea brains or to understand sometimes, because he's outside of time. He's looking down on this parade and he sees everything all at the same time, the very beginning and the very end. That's mind blowing. But if you can believe in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, then all this is other stuff is just icing on the cake. If you can believe that he created us out of nothing. Got into talk with a coworker asking me how, they're asking me questions about, and they're not believers, and asked me a question about Adam and Eve, that how did Adam, when he had two sons and blah, 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 if we all came from those two. They're talking kind of crazy stuff. And I said, yeah, if I can believe that the very first verse in God's word, that in the beginning, God created Barak, out of nothing, created the heavens and the earth, then all the other stuff is less than miraculous. If you know what I mean, I'm not demeaning anything, but when you look at it, it's less than. So if you can understand that and accept that, then everything else is just icing on the cake. So I turned around and asked them same question. They said, well, I can't believe that, blah, 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 incest and all this other stuff. And I was trying to explain that back then our gene pool was absolutely perfect. There's no flaws. There's no degradation in the DNA or the DNA chromosomes or genes. Nothing has decayed. It was like absolutely perfect. So I asked them, I said, okay, so you asking me a question. Let me ask you a question. I said, so what's more logical and easier to believe, that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, or in the beginning nothing created the heavens and the earth? And they without hesitation, they said nothing. And I just kind of I was kind of blown away for a second. And I obviously it's my workplace and I couldn't really say anything a lot. The only thing I could say is I turned around and looked at him and I said, well, then you have a lot more faith than I do, because the first law of biogenesis is life only comes from life. Life does not come from non-life. So you have this rock or whatever, this inanimate object. Life doesn't come from that. Life comes from a creator. You can't get life from a rock. There's not. They'll say, oh, okay, well, but you've got bacteria. I'm like, okay, but minus the bacteria or whatever, you have just a rock. There's no life. Something might be attached to it or whatever, or cling to it or fell on it or whatever. I'll give you that. But I'm sorry, I'm talking about just the rock itself. Life can't come from that. Life only comes from life and the mode of procreation. And we got into a discussion about the eyes and how they had to develop. And I'm like, well, if you believe that we've developed over millions and millions of years or billions of years, then how many of those billions of years were humans like walking around blind? Because in order for your eyes to work, they've had to have been created all at the same time. They couldn't have evolved like the optic nerves and all this other stuff, one nerve at a time. They all had to be created, kind of like the mousetrap. You have a mousetrap, you remove one of those parts, it doesn't work. It has to be all put together all at the same time in order for the mousetrap to work. Very simple explanation. But still, when you're living in the world and you're not living with a Christian, godly worldview, then you'll fall to absurdity. And that's what we had, was absurdity in that. And my wife had made a very strong comment one time. It's not the fact, it's not a head knowledge. You can have all the head knowledge, but it's down to here. In order to accept Christ and bow a knee to God, that means you have to surrender to him and bow a knee and be accountable to something else, someone else outside of you. And that's where the stumbling block is you have to be accountable to somebody else. If I'm not accountable, if I'm not a believer, I'm not accountable to anyone. I can do whatever I want. I can smoke pot, I can drink, watch pornography. I can do all these things. But the moment I'm accountable to God, then that Holy Spirit will convict us. And when he convicts us, that is when change happens. So I knew I was going to go off on some trails, some rabbit trails, but I think it was important to say. But he changed his name back to what we were doing in verse 5, Genesis 17, verse 5. No longer shall your name be called Abraham, but your name shall be Abram, but it will be Abraham. For I have made you a father of many nations. I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make nations of you, and kings shall come from you. Okay, our Messiah, Yeshua, will be that one of those kings that comes from that later down in the future. But the one thing I want to say about this, I will make you exceedingly fruitful. We look at our country right now, and we look at our nation right now, and we have a focus on transgenderism. We have a focus on homosexuality, lesbian, being gay, stuff like that, where you don't have that fruitfulness. God created Adam and Eve for what? To be fruitful. Same thing with here. If he's going to make you exceedingly fruitful, how can that be? Could people say, oh, I can be gay and be a Christian? No, you can't. Okay? It's an abomination. And in order to be fruitful and exceedingly fruitful, it takes a man and it takes a woman. Okay? But when you're looking at the homosexual lifestyle, that's not possible. So you can't say that being a Christian at the same time as being part of that LGBTQ plus community. It's like oil and water. They don't go together. You're either for him or you're against him. So that's just another kind of not a point to say that it's not in God's plan to be the homosexual and the transgender agenda that's going on right now. That is not within God's plan. And it says, and I will make you nations, and kings will come from you. I will establish my covenant between you and me and your generations after you in their generations for an everlasting covenant. What does that mean? This covenant is forever. Through this, it's not like I'm going to establish something and it's going to end. No, this is an everlasting covenant. This is not something that can be broken later. This is a continuing covenant that God made with Abraham and with his descendants. Okay, it's not just a one-time thing. It is a continuing covenant, that it is God's covenant, an unconditional covenant that he had made with the Jewish people, with Abraham, who through Abraham, the Jewish people will come. So you can't say that God was for this, and then now all of a sudden, okay, the Jews, you didn't accept Christ, now I'm going to put you off to the side. That is wrong, because right here, that would mean that God's a liar, and that's the thing. God is not a liar. So how can you have that mentality of a replacement theology that God is done with the Jewish people when right here in verse 7, he says, for an everlasting, okay, with his generations, me and you and your descendants after you in their generations for an everlasting covenant, to be God to you and your descendants after you. So God hasn't pushed Abraham or the Jewish nation to the side, okay? That is the farthest from the truth, because that would make God a liar, because he said right there, through his descendants for everlasting. And I will give to you and your descendants after you to the land in which you are a stranger, all the land of Canaan, which we know is Israel right now, the land of Israel, back to, again, God's covenant all the way back there is still applying today in 2023, still applies today. Okay, it's not that it expired 100 years ago. No, it still applies today. 1948, the Jews came back to their nation, came back to Israel, okay, established them, their homeland that was given to Abraham. Now they've got it back. They've came back to their homeland, the homeland that God gave to Abraham. I will give to you and your descendants after you the land in which you are a stranger, all the land of Canaan, as an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. It's an everlasting possession. Israel, the Jewish people, are not occupiers of that land. It is their land and their land alone. Yes, you have other people, you have neighbors, you've got Arabs, you've got Palestinians that are there. Great. But it is not their land. And to anyone that says that Israel, you use that phrase, an occupier, then you are no friend of God, because you are going against what God, if you are not with God the Father, then you are against him. And I will say that again. If you are not with the Father, you are against him. Because right there it says, as an everlasting possession. That is their land, okay? Their land, everlasting. And do you think he stopped being Israel's God? Do you think he stopped being the Jews, the Jewish nation, stopped being their God? No. Even though they have not seen the Messiah, it says in Matthew 24, verses 29 through 31, 32, that they will bow their knee, they will mourn, because they will see the man, see Yeshua coming back in the clouds with power and great glory, and they will mourn at the one that they have pierced. They will see him and they will mourn. They will be on their knees. They will cry. They will shed tears. They will mourn for the fact that they missed the first time he came. The second time he's coming to establish his kingdom. And once he establishes his kingdom, all these little naysayers that are out there, okay, will be put in their place. That's it. They will be put in their place. Yeshua will come down to the Mount of Olives. His feet will be planted on the Mount of Olives. He will take his throne of David. He will sit at the throne of David. And he will establish his kingdom here on earth and will reign here on earth. Whether you like it or not, okay? Gravity happens. If you don't believe in gravity, jump off a building. You'll soon be a believer. Okay? You don't think that's hot on the frying pan? Touch it. You become a believer really fast. You don't think Jesus is coming back? Just wait. Maranatha. Just wait. Come, Jesus, come. You will be a believer. You'll believe that he's coming back. You might not believe and put your trust in him, but he will make you a believer, because he will come back. And I mean a believer not in a salvific way, but you will see that it is true. Whether you believed it back then or not, you will see it. Verse 9. And God said to Abraham, as for you, you shall keep my covenant, you and your descendants after you throughout their generations. So he's basically telling them that you need to keep their covenant with them. This is my covenant which you shall keep between me and you and your descendants after you. Every male child among you shall be circumcised, and you shall be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskins, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between you and me. He who is 8 days old among you shall be circumcised, every male in their generation. He who is born in your house and brought with money from any foreigner who is not your descendant. He who is born in your house, he who is bought with your money must be circumcised, and my covenant shall be in your flesh for an everlasting covenant. Then he goes on, verse 17. Then Abraham fell on his face and laughed. Wait a second. Oh, verse 15. Sorry. And God said to Abraham, as for Sarai, your wife, you shall not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name, and I will bless her and also give you a son by her. Then I will bless her, and she shall be a mother of nations. Kings of people shall be from her. Same thing. Covenant with her, many nations. Verse 17. Then Abraham fell on his face and laughed and said in his heart, shall a child be born to a man who is 100 years old? And shall Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child? And Abraham said to God, oh, that Ishmael might live before you. And God said, no. Verse 19, Sarah your wife shall bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant, and with his descendants after him. Verse 20, and as for Ishmael, I have heard you. Behold, I have blessed him and will make him fruitful and will multiply him exceedingly. He shall begat 12 princes, and I will make him a great nation. But my covenant I will establish with Isaac, okay, whom Sarah shall bear to you as at this set time next year. So, as you know, Abraham had, without Sarah, had Ishmael. Ishmael, a lot of people, I believe the Muslim nation, Muhammad, all that came, the Arab nation came through Ishmael. Some people say no. I say it is, because they go right back to that Abraham and Isaac. But God spoke or chose, because Isaac wasn't a child out of the covenant. It was outside of God's covenant, outside of God's will. Whereas Isaac is inside of God's will. That is what God said when I will bear you a child. He said, prior to that, I will bear you a child. And they took it upon himself. Whereas Isaac is the promised child to Abraham and Sarah. So we see that Abraham is now going to be the father of many nations. But when you go back, and we'll kind of end it, we'll make it a short kind of video for tonight, because I just wanted to kind of recap. I felt like I wanted to recap a little bit on this before I get into the Mosaic Covenant, because that first part I felt was kind of important to get into, because the promise that God made to Abraham wasn't just for that time period, but it was forever. Not only a blessing of all nations, that God would be their God, and that means the Jewish people that came from Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and furthermore, God never forgot about the Jewish people. To this day, he hasn't forgot about the Jewish people. Still has a plan. He made them a kingdom of priests to show that God, without, and I said this last week, in their unbelief, in the Jewish people's, Jewish nation, in their unbelief, what impact has that made, and from Yeshua and all that, out of their unbelief, the worship and the adoration and the acceptance of Adonai, the Jewish God, basically. What kind of impact has that made on the Gentile world? Okay, huge impact. But what if they would have been believers? What if they would have accepted Yeshua? What if it would have been not just this fringe sect that started off, but what if the Jewish nation would have accepted Yeshua? Can you imagine the impact on the world today? It would be huge. It would be an absolutely huge impact. So with that, you look at the Abrahamic Covenant has not been replaced by the Mosaic Covenant. It's not. And its promises are as valid now as when the covenant was made. It's just added onto it. Like Jesus said at the when Yeshua said, I did not come into the world to abolish the law, the meaning the Torah, but I came to fulfill it. It was something that pointed forward to a point in time that God would fulfill his promise. And we'll also look at the new covenant, Jeremiah 31, but promise next week we're going to get into the Mosaic covenant, where we look at the similarities of, and we'll probably maybe spend a couple weeks on that. We'll look at not just the Mosaic covenant, but we'll look at Yeshua as a prophet unto Moses, a prophet like unto Moses, what Moses did, and we'll also look at how similar Yeshua is to, or I should say vice versa, how similar Moses is to Yeshua, time frame and stuff like that. We'll look at Abraham, Isaac, same thing. Abraham and Isaac, what Isaac did, that promise. There's so many different things we can look at from a messianic standpoint, which is just absolutely mind-blowing when you really sit back and realize that we worship a Jewish Messiah, and everything that Jesus did, everything Yeshua did was Jewish. We have to accept that. And we have to come to realization that Yeshua was Jewish. The church was Jewish. The Messianic church that started, they were all Jewish. So with that, it just makes sense to go back and look at the Jewish context. So we have the idea of the Abrahamic covenant. It is everlasting covenant. It is an unconditional covenant. God has not replaced, has not forgotten the Jewish people. And the promise for the land. This is God's land that he gave the Jewish people. And it is forever. So when you got people trying to say that they're occupiers, that the Jewish people are occupiers of the land, that's just makes my blood boil, because they're not. I mean, they're replacing and trying to do throughout history. Just for a second, look at all the different people, circumstances, events that have happened to the Jewish nation, trying to destroy them, and look at today. It's the same thing. It is a rebellion against God himself. Calvinism. It is a rebellion against a promise of God. Are they believers? Yes, they are believers. I would say they truly do believe in Christ. I think they're very misled and deceived if you think that they are the elect that the Bible speaks about, because they are surely not the elect. The Jewish nation is the elect, God's elect people. He created them as a kingdom of priests to show the world the true God of this universe. So with that, I want to say thank you. Again, if you haven't subscribed to the video or subscribed to my channel, subscribe. It just helps get the message out there. My whole idea of doing this is not for how many clicks and all that. It's not it. If I can encourage someone to learn a little bit more about the Jewishness of our faith, I've won. I've succeeded. One person, I've succeeded. That's all it's about, and that's all I've ever wanted, is to share what I learn and continually learn and share. God bless.